The Korean War was the first time the U.S. military engaged in a shooting conflict since the end of World War II. The conflict, which began in June 1950 and ended in an armistice in July 1953, resulted in the United States losing 36,574 service members killed in action and suffering 103,284 wounded, according to the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency, DPAA. But among these stark figures lies a deeper, more haunting statistic. Over 7,400 Americans remain unaccounted for, listed as missing in action, MIA, or prisoners of war, POW, who never returned. Unlike World War II or Vietnam, the Korean War did not conclude with a peace treaty. It ended in a ceasefire, an uneasy truce that persists to this day along the 2.5-mile-wide demilitarized zone, DMZ. And in that unresolved silence, the fate of thousands of American service members remains suspended between history and hope. On November 10, 2024, in Houston, Texas, that silence was broken, not with fanfare, but with quiet dignity. Veterans, family members, and community leaders gathered at the Calvary Korean Baptist Church for a ceremony unlike most Veterans Day observances. This was not a celebration of victory, but a solemn reckoning with absence. Organized in partnership with the U.S. government and the Republic of Korea, the event honored those who never came home and affirmed a commitment that stretches across more than 70 years of alliance. Brigadier General Michael Shanley, Commanding General of the 85th U.S. Army Reserve Support Command, stood before the assembled crowd as the guest speaker. Beside him were Young Ho Jung, Consul General of the Republic of Korea, Max Johnson, President of the Texas Lone Star Chapter of the Korean War Veterans Association, and Arthur L. Bryan, Commander of the Don C. Faith, MOH, Chapter 222, named for a Medal of Honor recipient lost in the Chosin Reservoir campaign. It is an absolute honor to be here to pay tribute to our veterans and to reflect on all they have made possible in America, the Republic of Korea, and around the world, Shanley said, his voice steady but weighted with gravity. Today we pay tribute to these heroes, sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters, who bravely faced the harsh realities of war. They fought not only for the South Korean people, but for the principles of democracy and freedom that we hold dear. But it was Consul General Jung who gave voice to the ceremony's deeper purpose. There are many lives that we recognize, he said. However, there is not as much recognition for those who never returned, those who remain missing in action. Although there are many events that honor those who died for our cause, I think there is a bit of lacking in terms of recognizing those missing. Jung began holding MIA memorial events in 2023, driven by a personal conviction that gratitude must include remembrance of the unresolved. It is important to remember those service members missing in action, he continued. Their families need to be remembered. There needs to be recognition and sensitivity toward protecting and supporting them as much as we can. The emotional centerpiece of the ceremony came when Jung presented a commemorative plaque bearing the photograph of Sergeant Frank Ayala Velasco to his surviving family. Velasco, a 21-year-old infantryman from Texas, served with A Company, 1st Battalion, 32nd Infantry Regiment, 7th Infantry Division. He went missing on December 2, 1950, during the brutal fighting of the Chosin Reservoir campaign, specifically during the harrowing retreat from Sinhung-ni to Hagaru-ri, where temperatures plunged to -35 degrees Fahrenheit, and Chinese forces surrounded U.S. and UN troops in overwhelming numbers. No definitive record exists of Velasco's final moments. He was never reported as a prisoner of war. and his remains were not among the 4,167 sets of American remains repatriated by North Korea between 1954 and 1956 under the terms of the armistice. Today, his name is inscribed on the Courts of the Missing at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu, and on the newly expanded Korean War Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C., which in 2022 added the names of 43,000 fallen and missing, a long overdue correction to decades of omission. I attended today's event to honor my great-uncle Frank Velasco, who is currently MIA from the Korean War, said Cecilia Torres, Velasco's grandniece. It is important for family members to have a chance and a space to see each other, to remember their fallen loved ones. I've been attending events like this since I was 10 years old with my grandfather. After he passed away 3 years ago, it's been a mission for me and my family to continue this remembrance, not just for Frank, but for all who never came home. The Forgotten War and its unfinished business. The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War, not because it lacked significance, but because it lacked closure. Members relative to total casualties of any major U.S. conflict. Of the 36,574 Americans killed, over 20%, 7,400, remain unaccounted for. By comparison, World War II saw 72,000 missing out of 405,000 killed, 18%, and Vietnam, 1,500 missing out of 58,000 killed, 2.6%. Why so many missing in Korea? The answer lies in the nature of the conflict itself. The Korean War was characterized by rapid advances and retreats, fluid front lines, and extreme terrain and weather. Battles like the Pusan Perimeter, the Incheon Landing, and the Chosin Reservoir involved intense, close-quarters combat in mountains, rice paddies, and frozen valleys, conditions that made battlefield recovery nearly impossible. When units were overrun or forced to withdraw under fire, the dead and wounded were often left behind. Compounding this was the policy of the communist forces. Both North Korean and Chinese troops routinely denied access to burial sites, destroyed dog tags, and refused to provide accurate POW MIA lists. After the armistice, North Korea returned 4,167 sets of remains in 55-gallon drums, many commingled, mislabeled, or incomplete. U.S. scientists later determined that only about 1,000 of these could be individually identified using 1950s technology. For decades, the search for the missing stalled. The Cold War froze diplomatic engagement. North Korea's isolation deepened. Families received only a single letter. Your loved one is missing in action. No further information is available. But in the 1990s, a quiet revolution began, not on the battlefield, but in the laboratory. Science, diplomacy, and the long road home. The modern effort to account for the missing began in 1996, when the U.S. and North Korea established the Joint Field Activities, JFAs, joint recovery missions in which American scientists and North Korean soldiers worked side by side to excavate crash sites and battlefields. Over the next decade, 33 missions recovered 220 sets of remains. Then, in 2005, North Korea abruptly suspended cooperation, citing political tensions. For nearly a decade, the program lay dormant. The breakthrough came not from Pyongyang, but from Seoul. In 2018, South Korea and the United States launched a new initiative, Joint Recovery Operations in South Korea, focusing on areas where U.S. soldiers worked side by side. Troops had been lost during the chaotic early months of the war, particularly the Nakhtong River battles and the defense of Daegu. This shift was strategic and symbolic. South Korea, now a stable democracy and close ally, had both the political will and the forensic infrastructure to support recovery. The Korean War Legacy Foundation, the Defense POW MIA Accounting Agency (DPAA), and the Republic of Korea's Ministry of National Defense Agency for KIA Recovery and Identification (MACRI) formed an unprecedented partnership. Today, recovery teams use ground-penetrating radar, LiDAR mapping, and archaeological excavation techniques to locate burial sites. Remains are transported to the DPAA laboratory at Joint Base Pearl Harbor-Hickam, where forensic anthropologists, odontologists, and DNA specialists work to identify them. The science is extraordinary. Even a single tooth or a fragment of bone can yield a mitochondrial DNA profile, which is then matched against reference samples voluntarily provided by family members. Over 90% of identifications now rely on DNA, a stark contrast to the 1950s when identification depended on dental records or personal effects. Since 2018, over 150 Korean War service members have been identified and returned to their families for burial with full military honors. Each identification represents years of scientific work, diplomatic coordination, and familial patience. But the work is far from over. Of the 7,400 still missing, approximately 5,300 are believed to be in North Korea, where access remains politically fraught. The remaining 2,100 are presumed lost in South Korea, the Sea of Japan, or in aircraft crashes over water. The human cost, generations of waiting. Behind every statistic is a family that has waited, sometimes for over 70 years, for answers. For families like the Velascos, the Korean War did not end in 1953. It continues in annual letters to the DPAA, in visits to memorial walls, in family stories passed down through generations. Cecilia Torres is part of a growing movement of third-generation MIA advocates. Grandchildren and great-nephews who have taken up the mantle of remembrance from aging parents and grandparents. Many, like Torres, grew up hearing stories of uncles they never met, men who left home as teenagers and vanished into the fog of war. The emotional toll is profound. Unlike families of the killed, who receive a flag, a grave, and a date of closure, MIA families live in permanent ambiguity. Is their loved one buried in an unmarked grave? Did he die instantly or suffer in captivity? Was his body recovered but never identified? This uncertainty shapes lives. Many MIA families refuse to hold funerals. Some keep their loved one's bedroom unchanged for decades. Others dedicate their lives to advocacy, joining organizations like the National League of Families of American Prisoners and Missing in Southeast Asia, which now includes Korea, or the Korean War Project, a grassroots database that has cataloged over 100,000 service records. The U.S. government recognizes this unique grief. In 2022, Congress passed the Korean War MIA Recognition Act, mandating the inclusion of all missing names on the Korean War Veterans Memorial Wall. The updated wall now bears 43,000 names, a powerful visual testament to the scale of loss. An alliance forged in sacrifice and sustained by memory. What makes the Houston ceremony and others like it so significant is not just the remembrance, but the partnership it embodies. South Korea's gratitude is not performative. It is institutional, generational, and deeply felt. Every year, the Republic of Korea funds scholarships for children of U.S. Korean War veterans. Korean school children are taught about the UN forces who defended their nation, and in 2023, the South Korean National Assembly passed a resolution formally recognizing the ongoing U.S. effort to recover the missing. This partnership is more than diplomacy, it is moral reciprocity. As Consul General Jung noted, the United States did not have to defend Korea. They chose to, and because they did, my country exists as a free democracy today. For American veterans, this recognition is deeply meaningful. Many Korean War vets, now in their 90s, feel that their service was overlooked by history. Ceremonies like the one in Houston validate their sacrifice and affirm that their missing comrades have not been forgotten. Brigadier General Shanley captured this sentiment in his closing remarks. "We stand here not just as Americans, but as partners with a nation that remembers, and in that remembrance, we honor not only the dead, but the living, the families who carry this burden with grace, and the allies who stand with us in the search for truth." The unfinished mission. The Korean War remains unfinished, not just politically, but morally. As long as 7,400 Americans are missing, the mission continues. The DPAA's goal is ambitious. Account for at least 200 Korean War service members per year by 2026. To achieve this, they are expanding partnerships with South Korea, developing new DNA extraction techniques for degraded remains, and digitizing millions of wartime records to cross-reference with recovery data. But the ultimate success of this mission depends not just on science or diplomacy. It depends on public awareness. The more families who submit DNA samples, the more identifications become possible. The more communities that hold ceremonies like the one in Houston, the more pressure there is to keep the issue alive in national consciousness. Sergeant Frank Velasco may never be found, but his name is no longer just a line in a database. It is etched in stone in Washington, D.C. It is spoken aloud in Houston churches. It is carried in the heart of a great niece who refuses to let history forget. And in that act of remembrance, something profound happens. The missing are no longer absent. They are present, in memory, in mission, and in the enduring bond between two nations that owe their freedom to their sacrifice. As the sun set over Houston on November 10th, 2024, a single bugle played taps. There were no cheers, no applause, only silence, and the quiet resolve of those who understand that some wars end not with victory, but with vigilance. And so the search continues, not for glory, not for closure, but for the simple, sacred promise, we will not leave you behind. As the sun set over Houston on November 10th, 2024, a single bugle played taps. There were no cheers, no applause, only silence, and the quiet resolve of those who understand that some wars end not with victory, but with vigilance. And so the search continues, not for glory, not for closure, but for the simple, sacred promise. We will not leave you behind. If this story moved you, if you believe that the sacrifices of our Korean War veterans and their families deserve to be remembered, honored, and shared, we invite you to subscribe to this channel. By subscribing, you help ensure that these stories of courage, loss, and enduring partnership are preserved for future generations. You'll receive no gimmicks, no distractions, just carefully researched, respectfully told history, made for those who remember, and for those who carry the memory forward. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.